A historic victory in a special election for an Iowa Senate seat in the Metro. It's been vacant since Democratic Senator Claire Celsi died a couple months ago. Democrat Renee Hardman handily defeated Republican challenger Lucas Lofton to represent parts of Clive, Windsor Heights, and West Des Moines. Local 5's Emma Strunner shares more on what this means for the state Senate moving forward.
A packed house at the tavern Tuesday evening of Iowans eagerly awaiting to hear the election results, only to find out at 8 p.m. that Renee Hardman would be filling the seat for Iowa Senate District 16.
Something is happening in Iowa that almost nobody saw coming. And if you are not paying attention right now, you are going to miss one of the biggest political collapses of the decade unfolding in real time. This is not some swing state where surprises are expected. This is Iowa. Ruby red, rock solid, Trump by 13 points Iowa. A state where Republicans control the governor's mansion, both chambers of the legislature, and every single seat in the congressional delegation. And yet, over the past 18 months, that fortress has been cracking apart seat by seat, election by election, in a way that has stunned strategists on both sides of the aisle.
Shortly after polls closed, unofficial results came in, and Renee Hardman beat Lucas Lofton in the race to fill the Iowa Senate District 16 seat.
Our community made their voices heard tonight.
This blocks Iowa Republicans from regaining a supermajority lost in August, a factor Hardman says was key in winning the race.
We just decided as a collective that we're going to get this job done, and we are going to prevent the supermajority. And that is what helped drive our motivation to get this job done.
What started as a handful of quiet special elections in small legislative districts has snowballed into something so big that it is now threatening to reshape the entire balance of power heading into November. And the scariest part for Republicans is this: it is not over yet. To understand why this matters so much, you have to understand what Iowa represents. This is not just another state on the map. Iowa is the place that first anointed Barack Obama, then swung hard right for Donald Trump, then swung even harder right in 2024.
Well, I can't speak for all Democrats, but I can speak for myself. And truly, I think that reaching people where they are is what will make the difference. I wanted to prioritize online communication. Folks get their information in different ways now. And so, again, reaching people where they are via social media. We prioritize Spanish language communication. We had, get out the vote messaging in Spanish. The full website was available in Spanish. That was really important to me.
It is a state Republicans built into a stronghold, a blueprint for how a Midwestern farm state could become permanently red. Every statewide office except one belongs to the GOP. The legislature has been under total Republican control for years. This is supposed to be the safest ground Republicans have. So when cracks start showing up here in districts Republicans were never supposed to lose, it is not a local story anymore. It becomes a warning sign for the entire party, and everybody in Washington knows it. The first crack came in January of 2025, and almost nobody outside of Iowa noticed at the time. A state Senate seat opened up, and Democrats pulled off a win in a district that had strongly favored Trump just months earlier.
I heard frustration overwhelmingly. People in my area are concerned about their Social Security benefits. They're concerned about what happens even if they're not utilizing Medicaid. What happens when Medicaid is defunded to our rural and semi-rural hospitals like the ones in my area? We have the only major medical center for 90 miles in any direction, and when those funds go away, that affects everyone in the community, whether or not they're utilizing, government programs for health insurance.
It seemed like a fluke. Special elections are quirky. Turnout is low. Sometimes the map just breaks a certain way. Republicans shrugged it off. National media barely covered it. But inside the Iowa political world, a few people started paying closer attention, because flipping a Trump district, even a small one, even in a low turnout race, is not supposed to happen in a place like this. It was the first domino. Nobody knew yet how many more were coming. Then came August. And this is where things stopped looking like a fluke and started looking like a pattern. A state Senate seat in the district covering Sioux City, deep in the Republican stronghold of northwestern Iowa, became open after the death of the Republican senator who had held it.
We just decided as a collective that we're going to get this job done, and we are going to prevent the supermajority. And that is what helped drive our motivation to get this job done.
A West Des Moines City Councilwoman and a Lutheran Services Iowa CEO, Hardman now makes history.
It has led me to this historic moment as the first African-American woman elected to the Iowa Senate.
She feels the seat left vacant by Claire Celsey, who passed away in October.
This was not a marginal district. This was the kind of seat Republicans were supposed to win in their sleep. Instead, Democrat Caitlin Dray didn't just win, she won comfortably, taking the seat with a clear majority of the vote against her Republican opponent. And this win did something that made headlines across the state. It broke the Republican supermajority in the Iowa Senate entirely, dropping their advantage below the two-thirds threshold they needed to easily push through appointments from the governor without any Democratic input at all. The reaction from Republicans was immediate, and it was defensive. Iowa GOP leadership tried to explain the loss away, framing it as the result of national Democrats pouring in outside money and volunteers just to win a single state legislative seat by a slim margin.
Okay, tell us what it's been like on the doors. I know you've been out talking with a lot of voters.
I have. We have been out knocking on doors between myself and plenty of volunteers and supporters, and they're excited. They're excited that a candidate is out there that is going to be able to speak truth to power, someone who has lived her life in service for everything that she's done, and they are excited about what we're fighting for. And that's to strengthen public education, affordability for all, a voice for all, and being able to work across the aisles, which I have been able to do as a sitting city council person for almost 8 years.
On the surface, that spin made some sense, but underneath it was something much harder to explain away. Democrats had now flipped 2 Republican-held seats in a single year, in a state where that is not supposed to be possible. Democratic leaders, meanwhile, were not being quiet about it. National Democratic officials framed the win as proof that voters were turning on the party in power, warning that this should be sending, in their words, a flashing warning sign to Republicans everywhere. And for once, the numbers were backing up the rhetoric. But that wasn't the end of it. Not even close. Just 1 month earlier, in March, Democrats had come shockingly close to flipping a Southeast Iowa House seat that Republicans had always considered an easy hold, losing narrowly in a race that, on paper, should never have been competitive at all. Then in April, Democrats flipped an actual Iowa House seat outright. Suddenly, this wasn't a story about one unlucky special election. This was a full pattern, stacking up month after month, each one chipping away a little more at the wall Republicans had spent years building. Anyone tracking Iowa politics closely could feel the temperature rising. Something structural was shifting underneath the surface, and it was happening faster than anyone expected. And then, just when it seemed like the political shockwaves in Iowa couldn't get any bigger, 2 of the most powerful Republicans in the entire state made stunning announcements that reshaped everything. Governor Kim Reynolds, who had led the state for years and was widely expected to seek another term, announced she would not run again. It caught many in her own party off guard. Around the same time, longtime Republican Senator Joni Ernst also confirmed she would not seek a third term, ending years of speculation and immediately throwing open one of the most important Senate races in the entire country. Think about what that means. 2 of the biggest Republican names in Iowa gone from the ballot in the same election cycle, right as their party was already reeling from a string of embarrassing legislative losses. Suddenly, this was not just about a handful of state Senate seats anymore. This was about who controls Iowa's identity for the next decade. Making matters worse for Republicans, Ernst's final year in office had already been a public relations disaster. At a town hall, when a constituent raised concerns about the potentially deadly consequences of Medicaid cuts tied to the party's signature legislation, Ernst responded with a comment that stunned the room and went viral almost instantly, telling the crowd that everyone eventually is going to die. Instead of walking it back, she doubled down days later, releasing what was meant to be an apology video filmed of all places in a cemetery dripping with sarcasm rather than remorse. Critics tore into it as tone-deaf and dismissive at exactly the moment her party could least afford another headline like that. It became one more piece of ammunition for Democrats trying to paint a picture of a party out of touch with the very voters it claimed to be protecting. With Reynolds and Ernst both stepping aside, Republicans suddenly found themselves scrambling to defend two of the most important offices in the state at the same time, without a clear frontrunner for either one. 5 different Republicans jumped into the race to replace Reynolds as governor, creating a chaotic, drawn-out primary battle that dragged on for months without a clear favorite. It took a late endorsement from President Trump himself, backing Congressman Randy Feenstra, to finally settle the race and stop the infighting. On the Senate side, Congresswoman Ashley Hinson emerged as the frontrunner almost immediately with Trump's early support. But the fact that Republicans needed him to step in and settle 2 separate contested primaries in the same red state in the same year tells you just how unsettled things had become inside the party. But nobody expected what happened next. As if 2 open seats and a chaotic primary season weren't enough, Iowa Democrats delivered yet another gut punch in December. A Democratic state senator, Claire Celsi, passed away in October, opening up a seat representing the Des Moines suburbs. This was supposed to be Republicans' chance to claw back some of what they had lost, to reclaim the 2/3 supermajority control of the legislature that had slipped away earlier in the year. Instead, Democrat Renee Hardman didn't just hold the seat. She demolished her Republican opponent by more than 40 percentage points, becoming the first black woman ever elected to the Iowa Senate in the process. It was the 6th special election of the year in Iowa, and Republicans had now lost the ones that mattered most. Let that sink in for a second. 6 special elections in a single year in one of the most reliably Republican states in the entire country, and the pattern kept repeating itself over and over again. Losses in districts that should have been locks. Landslide margins for Democrats in places Republicans had written off as safe. A supermajority, painstakingly built over years, broken apart piece by piece in the span of 12 months. Republican officials kept insisting publicly that they still held commanding majorities in both chambers, and technically, they were right. But the trend line was undeniable, and everyone from local reporters to national strategists could see it plainly. Something in Iowa was shifting, and it was shifting fast. Here is where things get even more complicated and even more interesting, because Republicans have a counter-argument, and it is not a weak one. Special elections are notoriously unreliable predictors of general election outcomes. Turnout in these races is often shockingly low. Sometimes barely a quarter of registered voters bother to show up, which means a small, highly motivated slice of the electorate can swing results dramatically in ways that simply do not translate to a full midterm election with millions of voters participating. Republican officials have leaned hard into this argument, insisting that national Democrats flooding a handful of tiny districts with volunteers and cash to win by a few hundred votes tells you nothing about how the broader state will vote in November when everyone actually shows up. It is a fair point. It is also a point that gets a little harder to make after the 6th loss in a row. Because here is the thing statisticians and political forecasters keep coming back to. One fluky special election result, sure, that happens. 2, maybe still a coincidence, but 6 consecutive special elections trending in the same direction in the same state, across different regions, different demographics, and different types of districts. That is not noise. That is signal. Historically, special election performance has actually been one of the more reliable early indicators of which direction the political winds are blowing heading into a midterm year, precisely because it captures which side's voters are motivated enough to show up when it is inconvenient. And in Iowa, throughout 2025, it was consistently Democratic voters showing up and consistently Republican-held turf giving way. So by the time the June 2026 primaries rolled around, all of this tension had built to a boiling point. The Republican primary for governor, after months of a crowded 5-way race, was finally settled with President Trump's endorsed candidate Randy Feenstra pulling ahead. On the Democratic side, the primary was never really close. State Auditor Rob Sand, the only Democrat holding statewide office in all of Iowa, ran completely unopposed, walking straight into the general election without having to spend a single dollar or a single day fighting off a primary challenger. Think about the contrast there. Republicans burned months and resources fighting each other just to pick a nominee. Democrats already had theirs locked in and ready to go, saving time, money, and momentum for the fight that actually matters. The Senate race told a similar story. Ashley Hinson easily secured the Republican nomination with Trump's backing, crushing her primary opponent with well over 70% of the vote. On paper, that looks like a dominant, unified Republican campaign heading into the fall. But look at who she is running against. Democratic State Representative Josh Turek decisively defeated State Senator Zach Walz in a hard-fought primary that saw both candidates rack up serious institutional support, labor endorsements, and even a high-profile endorsement from Elizabeth Warren for his opponent. Turek enters the general election with real momentum, real name recognition, and a campaign already tested through a competitive primary fight. And here is the historical detail that should make every Republican strategist nervous. Democrats have not won a Senate race in Iowa since 2008. Not once in over 15 years. Now zoom out and look at the full picture, because this is where everything connects. This is the first time in nearly 60 years that Iowa will hold an open governor's race and an open Senate race in the same election cycle. Both seats up for grabs at the same time, both without an incumbent, both following a year where Republicans hemorrhaged special election after special election in districts they were supposed to dominate. Add to that the fact that several of Iowa's congressional districts, seats Republicans currently hold in every single one, are now considered genuinely competitive for the first time in years. Forecasters have shifted their ratings on multiple House races toward Democrats, acknowledging that districts once considered safely Republican are now legitimate toss-ups heading into the fall. And this is where things become even worse for the party trying to defend its turf, because national Republicans clearly know how much trouble they are in here. Vice President J.D. Vance made a trip to Iowa specifically to campaign and boost the party's candidates. A sign that Republicans at the highest levels are treating this state not as a formality, but as a genuine battleground that needs shoring up. When a sitting vice president has to personally show up in a state Trump won by double digits just 2 years earlier, that tells you everything you need to know about how nervous the party actually is. This is not the